Well, good morning. How's everyone doing today? Good. Nice. We are beginning a new sermon series. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. Typically, try to map out sermons, series, ideas, beginning of the year, and then start filling in more of the details as we move along. But I always have these big ideas of what I want the sermons to look like. This year, me and Sammy got together in December and kind of mapped out the entire year. And I knew that this movie, The Odyssey, was going to be coming out, I believe, right in the beginning of July. And thought that would make for a great series. So here we are. I'm calling this one the Odyssey Remix. And I'll explain what that means here in a few moments. And I subtitled it The Voyage Home, which I know in my subconscious, I definitely got that title from. Any bonus points for anyone who knows where that title comes from? Star Trek 4, best Star Trek movie, yes. Oh, man. Now, okay, the title for today's sermon, though, because you know I love a good title, and the title for this one has been about 35 years in the making, and we'll see if my parents actually remember this. The title is From Troy to Ithaca. Now, let me give you a little background to this title. I think it was it sixth grade, I think I did this in. I was learning about Greek mythology, started learning about the Odyssey. We had an assignment. You need to make a board game based off of the Odyssey. We spent, my parents, because that's how it typically works. Your kids have a project, but the kids don't do it. The parents end up doing it. So my parents did this project for me, of course, with my help. We had all these little clay figurines, and it was a board game where you had to go from Troy back home to Ithaca, and it chronicled Odysseus's journey home with all the different obstacles and challenges that he faced. So I'm titling this one, it's a nod to that board game that I made 35 years ago, From Troy to Ithaca, which seems like a very fitting title for the first sermon of our Odyssey remix. Now, this is the version of the Odyssey that I am currently reading with this translation by Robert Fagles. It's a great translation, so if anyone wants to get into reading the Odyssey as we are in this series, here is a translation that I would recommend if you want to prep before the movie comes out at the beginning of July. And let me give you a little background, and if you are unfamiliar with the Odyssey, I don't mind giving spoilers because this has been around for 3,000 years, so you've had quite a bit of time to get caught up with it. But what I want to talk about over the next couple of weeks, and here are some of the main themes that we find in the Odyssey. The main theme, obviously, is this idea of homecoming. Odysseus has been fighting in the Trojan War, and he now wants to return home. He is longing for restoration. He wants to be restored to his wife, his son, and to his beautiful home country of Ithaca. And the Odyssey chronicles this journey home, this 10-year journey that Odysseus took to travel home after fighting the Trojan War. The story is all about commitment. It's about dedication. It's about loyalty. And probably some of the main features within probably what the movie will highlight and what many of us know about the book, the story, it's all about overcoming different challenges. There are different monsters throughout this journey that Odysseus and his men have to overcome. There are distractions. Doesn't this sound a bit like life? You are on a journey somewhere to a desired end result, and what happens in life? Well, we face challenges and obstacles. There's different monsters that we have to overcome along the way. And I knew that all of these themes would just make for a beautiful sermon series. And then as the months went on and I started thinking a little bit more about this, of course, the Odyssey 3,000 years ago, or at least the final form that we have, because it probably would have been an oral tradition that would have been passed down orally before it ended up in the version that you currently have and that you can read in all the different translations. But this is a story, a deep, deep story about what it means to be human. Because some of the things about what it meant to be human 3,000 years ago, well, it's still the same for us today. Dedication, commitment, loyalty, overcoming obstacles, challenges. Humans faced this 3,000 years ago. Well, we still face all of these themes. This is why this book is so relevant and so timely for us in our world today, because the themes, they might look a little bit different in how we face them, but under the story, the ideas are still the same. And as I was thinking about all these themes, And as you get closer to a series, you kind of map it out. Then you get a little bit closer and you're like, okay, I need more of the details. I need the outline. I need to know exactly what the illustrations and the things that we're going to talk about. What started popping into my mind were all these old messages from Awaken, specifically some of the parables of Jesus. And I saw how they dovetailed and they coincided with some of the themes from the Odyssey. There's all these different themes and stories and ideas that we have explored over the many, many different years of Awaken. And Joe referenced one last week. As I started putting this together, and I actually mentioned this to Sammy probably about 3 weeks ago before Joe even referenced this one particular parable last week, I said, there's something about the Odyssey and then these old sermons that are resurrecting themselves within my soul. And what I want to do for this series, I want to put all this into a blender. So we have the Odyssey themes, then we have some old messages, stories, themes, and ideas that I've explored that have really meant a whole lot to me and to many of you, as I've heard throughout the years. And so we come to the Odyssey remix, where we're throwing into a blender the story of the Odyssey, but also some of the older and beloved sermons and stories of Awaken. And with that, I offer you a 4-week sermon series called the Odyssey Remix, The Voyage Home. Now, here we are. This is the journey that Odysseus took home after the Trojan War. Here he is. Him and his men are here in Troy. He's trying to get to Ithaca. Notice how this path doesn't seem to go right from A to B, but there's all this wandering along the way. And we'll talk about what it means to wander next week, actually. So this map will be very prominent as we move through this series because that's how life works. You're trying to go from Troy to Ithaca, but you end up over here with the sirens. And then you end up over here by the boot of Italy, and you're like, whoa, how do I find my way home? You ever run across this in life? You're trying to get somewhere, and you're like, how did I end up here in the deep weeds? Because that's how life typically works, and you have to correct your course, and you have to somehow go through the woods and the weeds in order to find your way back home. This is a 10-year return journey, and that's how life feels as well. We're trying to get somewhere, and you think it's going to take a month, and you're like, wow, I'm 6 years into this, and I'm nowhere near home. So this map will be featured prominently in this series. As we've mentioned, the Odyssey, it's the story of longing for home, to restore all that has been lost. Do you ever find this longing within your bones? There's something that you've experienced that's been broken. There's a wholeness maybe that you've experienced. Maybe it was a time in your life when everything felt like it was going the way in which it was supposed to go. Things were smooth, things were level, and then you hit a bump. And you find yourself removed from home, and the deepest longing that you have within you is this desire to return, to find your way home. This is what the Odyssey is all about. Odysseus, more than anything, wants to be home with his family, his country. He's fought in this war. Now he's wandering around, but the thing that drives him, the thing that keeps him going, the thing that he is committed to, what he desires beyond all else in life. And we'll talk a bit about desire because this is a book about desire and we all have desires. But the thing that he is desiring is to just be at home. It's like when you're traveling and the only thing that you want, especially on that long plane flight home, what do you want? Your bed. You've had a great time. You've enjoyed the company of others, but now you just want to be home in your own bed with your own pillow, in your own mattress. Now, this is some of the main ideas that we find actually throughout the Bible as well. Early on in the beginning, we have wholeness, we have harmony, we have the Hebrew word that is used is shalom. Everything is in its rightful place. This is known as the Garden of Eden, but then there's a loss, there's an exile, there's a removal from home, and the rest of the story is about humanity finding their way home. We see this time and time again. It's the common theme that we talk about here at Awaken. We have home, the Israelites, they have reached the promised land, but then there is exile. They are removed to a foreign land. What do they want? To return home. And just like the Exodus, where God was leading the Israelites out of bondage, out of slavery, into a homeland, this is what Jesus does for us. Jesus moves us from a spiritual exile so that we may return home. So that all that which has been lost and broken within us and within our world can now be restored and put back together. So I would argue, and I think this is highlighted within the Odyssey, a story 3,000 plus years old, is that there is this universal human longing to return home, to experience peace and wholeness, for everything to be in its rightful place. I've heard a few people talk about salvation. We talk about the salvation that Jesus brings. Another way in which we could describe it is salvation is like coming home. It's being back where you've always belonged. Now, when we come to Jesus, what we find is that Jesus not only showed us the way home, but provided the way home for us. Jesus did that which we ourselves were not and still are not able to do on our own power. And so Jesus embodied this return home. Jesus taught about what it meant to return home. He showed us the way. He taught it. And one of the ways in which he would constantly teach were through parables. And we have went through many, many parables throughout the history of Awaken. I absolutely love parables. I love talking about them. They are some of the stories and the depth and the insight and the wisdom to these parables, they continue to do something within me. And so we always return back to the parables because not only are they a great teaching technique, but I think there's so much wisdom there that at a first glance you often miss. And so you need to sit with these parables for a while in order to really mine the depths of what they are saying. One of the ideas that Jesus often spoke about in parables was the kingdom of heaven. And I would equate the kingdom of heaven with this idea of home. When Jesus says, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like, he's saying this is what God essentially is like. This is what it looks like to be home. This is what it looks like for everything in the world to be in its rightful place. And the thing about the kingdom of heaven, as much as some people want to talk about the kingdom of heaven as being this far off, distant future reality, well, the kingdom of heaven, it's a present reality as well. It's a reality that is for you right here, right now, as well as some point in the future. Sometimes we take the teachings of Jesus and we think, well, that is for some future time and place. But in reality, Christ wants to offer peace and wholeness in your life right here, right now. It's a truth that you do not have to wait for. So Jesus in these parables is saying, here's how to experience God right here, right now, in this time and place. It wasn't a teaching for the future, but it was a teaching for now and then ultimately into the future as well. But this was a present reality that was available then, and that is available for us right here where we find ourselves. So here's one of the parables. Joe mentioned it last week. I am keeping good on my promise of talking about the parable of the pearl. Here we are, Matthew chapter 13. The kingdom of heaven, God, is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. Then in his joy, went and sold all he had, and he bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven, God's like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. Two parables side by side conveying the same idea. There's two things that we have to note here with these two parables. The parables, they begin with what? Searching, seeking. There's this hidden treasure. So if something's hidden, well, it implies you got to do a little searching, a little digging for it. And then there is a merchant. What's the merchant doing? He's looking for pearls. The merchant has a purpose. There's something to his searching. The merchant is looking for fine, priceless pearls. And here's the second thing to note. The searching ends when the hidden treasure or the pearl are found. The searching ends at that moment, and then the merchant, the man searching, they sell everything in order to own the treasure and own that pearl. Treasure, pearl, things of infinite worth. These are things that are highly desired, which then raises the question for us in our lives. For what treasure would you be willing to sell everything that you own? For some of you, I would sell it all to have the perfect house. Others, you're like, I would sell it all for fine jewelry. As long as I could be adorned with the finest jewelry, it doesn't matter where I live, doesn't matter what car I drive, or if I just take an Uber around town. For others, the things that you desire beyond anything else might be some of the latest technological gadgets. What about that sports car that you've been dreaming of, that you've been coveting when your neighbor drives up and down the street? You know who you are. Plane tickets for the perfect vacation. You would sell it all. You would live in a shack as long as you could go visit a destination of your choice every single year. What about that beautiful walk-in closet right there? Like, I don't care where I live. I could have a tent, but as long as I have a container with a walk-in closet like that on my yard, everything is fine. So there are these physical things that we desire beyond all else. And here's the thing about our desires. They dictate how we live. They decide how we spend our time, our finances. We could say that our desires are the things that drive us forward in life. So there's these physical desires, but then at the same time, we all have these non-physical desires. And sometimes the non-material, the things that you can't touch, those desires, they become even more important than the physical desires that you can acquire. And the non-physical, the non-material desires, these aren't things that you can necessarily purchase in life. What about your health? The thing that you desire beyond anything is to be healthy. What about this one? 5 more minutes with that person. A loved one who is no longer here. And if you could just have 5 more minutes with them, that's the thing that you desire beyond all else in life. What about peace? True fulfillment in your life. I mean, sometimes these non-material, they weigh out more than the physical things. The physical things are nice, but I would argue that life often goes askew when we focus on the physical more than the non-physical, the non-material. What about for you, connection with others? Or connection with God becomes the thing that you desire more than anything else. See, these parables are parables about values, and they're parables about desires. And what they bring to mind is, well, what is it that is valued above all else in life? Or what is desired above all else in life? And it causes us to look inward and to think about the things that we value and desire. Now, if we go all the way back to 2014, I looked it up, Joe. 2014 was when I first gave this sermon on the pearl of great price. So this was early on in the life of Awaken. I had finished the sermon. And at that point, I was manuscripting my sermons. So I had finished the manuscript of that sermon. And the sermon, it was great. I loved it. I was satisfied with how it went. Normally about 6 pages, and I knew I had a sermon at that point. So page 6 was done, written. Then I decided, after having written the sermon, I said, you know what? Let me take a look at what this one word means in Greek. Because there was something within me that even though the sermon was done, there was a sense within that I was missing something about the parable of the pearl and the hidden treasure. Again, the sermon was great. Like, could have closed the MacBook, whatever, laptop. I was ready to go, ready for Sunday. Everyone would have been fine with it. But yet there was something within, and I'm like, oh, I'm missing something. So I looked this word up. And it's the word right there that's in caps and that I made quite large so that you cannot miss it. What's the word? All right, I'm glad that you all passed your eye test. Good. 20/20 plus vision. It shows up twice, once in each parable. So I looked it up. It's the Greek word agorazo. Want to say that one? Because Joe always makes fun of me for making you all say that. Can you say that? Agorazo? You guys, Greek scholars, don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise, all right? Don't let Joe ever tell you otherwise. Well, agorazo, it's a marketplace term. What it signifies is a transfer of ownership. I used to work at a car garage throughout high school and then college. One of the things that we did at the car garage, we sold used cars. Whenever anyone wanted to sell a car, we had a whole parking lot filled with used cars that were for sale. Whenever anyone's like, you know what, I'm getting a new car, let's get rid of this one. Well, it was my job to ask, do you have the title for the car? Because you couldn't sell the car without a title, because the title signified that you owned the car, and then when you sold it to someone else, you would give the title along with the car in order to prove that you then are the rightful owner of that car. So having the title signified there was a transfer of ownership. This is what this word agorazo is talking about. There's a transfer of ownership. Something, someone belonged to someone, something, and then someone else came and bought it, and the title was being transferred. Well, then I asked another question after looking at this word because I found that quite interesting. I said, where else does this word show up in the New Testament? Or a secondary question, how else? Because there's the first question, but then there's always like 15 other questions. You know, you have one question, but then it just raises a whole bunch of other ones. So for me, the question was, well, where else does it show up? And then how else is it used? Oh, it actually shows up in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Do you not know, this is Paul speaking, do you not know your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were, what's that word? You were, oh, there's that word again. Or what's the Greek word? Who remembers? Oh, I love it. Yes. I don't have to say it anymore. Oh, wait, it's on the screen. I forgot. I thought you guys had it all memorized. Oh, come on. I gave it away. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. Now that's interesting because when Paul uses it here, he's using this word to speak about what the death and resurrection of Jesus accomplished. And here's what he is saying. Through Jesus, your life has been bought by God. What Paul is saying, something quite profound 2,000 years ago, still just as profound for us today. Paul is saying, you belong to Christ, and that is to be your fundamental identity. I would argue then the Christian faith then is about learning how to trust and live into that reality, how you live into that identity, because Jesus would go around proclaiming all the time, here's the invitation to trust that which is most true about you. Remember, Jesus embodied and provided the way home. What Paul is saying is that you have been bought. There might be some other identities that have formed you, that have held you captive, that have held you in bondage. But those identities, they're just illusions, because the truest identity, the truest nature, the truth that God speaks over you is that you belong to Christ. And the invitation that Jesus was offering 2,000 years ago and for us today is to live into, to accept that reality, that invitation, and then to live according to that truth. Now, if we go back to this parable here, the traditional view of the hidden treasure in parable is that, well, you're the one that's doing the seeking. And that God is the one who's like this cosmic hide and go seek. God is the one doing the hiding. And that's okay. I mean, desiring God, of course, it's a good thing. Of course it is. That is good. But the parable is actually saying something completely different, because this way, the traditional way of looking at these two parables side by side is, well, this becomes a religion of your effort. If you're the one doing the seeking, this is a religion based on that which you can do in your own power. Instead, these parables reveal the way of grace. Notice this, the kingdom of heaven like a treasure. When a man found that he hid it, then in his, I love this word, in his joy. Joy, we looked at this 2 weeks ago. It's the Greek word charis. It's where we get Eucharist. Charis can be translated as gift or grace. Eucharist meaning the good gift of Jesus. Here's this word joy. In his joy, this person went and sold it. These two parables are about a God who endlessly seeks you because of the priceless worth you possess simply by being you. And this seeking, searching, chasing after you is all done because of what? Joy. It's a gift. It's grace. Hebrews 12, for the what? Joy. There's that word charis, set before him, speaking about Jesus. Jesus endured the cross. For the joy, you've been bought. For the joy, your life has been redeemed. All the ways in which your life has been broken, including the ways in which we contribute to that brokenness, it's been restored, forgiven, brought back to wholeness, because that's who God is. And it's a joy for God to sell it all in order to restore and redeem you. Because that is how worthy and valuable your life is to God. You, my friends, are the treasure. You are the priceless pearl. And don't you ever forget that. When I gave this sermon back in 2014, I actually handed pearls out to everyone. And some people would come back to me like a year or two later and like, I still have my pearl. I still have this as a continual reminder of my value and my worth, because we all know how life gets. And life gets hard. And that truth often gets beaten out of us. And we need those reminders to show us how much we are loved and valued. And this is a truth I think is deeply embedded in Scripture all the way from the very beginning. We have Adam and Eve. The man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid because they felt shame. They hid from God. What did God do as they went into hiding? Did God turn and run the other way? No, God pursued them in the midst of their brokenness and their shame. Sometimes we feel like Adam and Eve. We feel like we've blown it. We don't feel good about ourselves, about our value, our worth. And so we want to go and hide behind the trees in the cool of the day. And yet where is God? Right there by our side, pursuing us, saying, I'll lead you home. I'll restore that which has been broken. We sometimes don't feel ourselves worthy of receiving that restoration and that wholeness, but God's like, nah, don't worry about that. I got that covered. Through Jesus, that's all been taken care of. And God reaches God's hand out and says, you, my child, are worthy, loved, and valued. Let's go home together. Restoration is possible. See, the question that we are endlessly asking ourselves is, could we be loved just as we are? It's a question we all want to know. Could I, in the midst of my brokenness, could I be loved simply as I am? And the true Christian message, the message of Jesus says, yes, you are loved just as you are. When we flip the parable to the traditional religious way, it becomes about us having to prove our value and our worth. by seeking and searching and finding God by doing all the right things. Now, let's go back to the Odyssey here for a moment. If you know anything about the Odyssey and Odysseus' journey home, why is he forced to wander around for 10 years? Because the gods, specifically Poseidon, are angry with Odysseus. Didn't like the fact that they defeated the Trojans, and then Odysseus goes and he blinds the Cyclops, Poseidon's son, which we will talk about the Cyclops story here in, I think, 3 weeks, because absolutely love that story, so we'll get there in about 3 weeks. But what we find in the ancient world, in Greek mythology, and I think this idea of religion was swirling around the world 3,000 years ago, and I think it still is swirling around our world today, is that the gods were blocking the path home. Odysseus had to prove his merit, his worth, his value. Essentially, Odysseus had to outsmart the gods in order to make it home. And what we find here with these gods 3,000 years ago, and we see this all the time throughout the Old Testament as well, and God is constantly pushing, leading his people forward into a new way of understanding the divine. But what we discover is that the gods are angry, they're vindictive, and they're wrathful. And I think this way of viewing the gods has been lodged into our subconscious somewhere. Because when we mess up, when we feel shame, when we feel brokenness within us, our human tendency is often to revert back to this ancient way of understanding the divine. God must be angry at me. We expect a God of wrath when we've blown it. Why do you think Adam and Eve revert and go back to the trees? Why do they go into hiding? Because we expect that God is going to be angry. But instead, what we find is we discover in Jesus a God of grace and forgiveness and new life. When we blow it and we don't feel worthy about ourselves, we expect a God who is disappointed in us. But rather, what we see in Jesus, what Jesus embodied and how he taught, is that the true picture of God, the true nature of reality, is a God who is right there holding your hand and saying, we will make it through together. There are some things we need to discuss. There are some things we need to work through, yes, but the grace of God, the power of God is with you to restore and to bring wholeness to your life. I would argue that religion has ruined the parable of the pearl. And I will stand on that truth for the rest of my life. From 2014, I have never been able to see this parable any other way. Whenever anyone teaches it another way, I'm like, it's all right, but you're missing the beauty of what this parable is conveying. See, it's easier to believe that we have to earn God's love by proving ourselves rather than to trust that we're already loved. We revert back to thinking, I got to show God how worthy I am of the sacrifice of Jesus, rather than living into that which has already been accomplished. Finding God, whenever we look at this religious ruining of the parable, finding God becomes about us. If we happen to look in the right places, if we sacrifice enough of ourselves, and all these are good things, don't get me wrong, these are good things. Desiring God is a very, very good thing. Please don't hear me saying otherwise. If we live righteously enough, then we will find God. But the parable says, well, God is right there present with you in this moment. If we would open our eyes, if we would live into the grace, the gift, we would see that God is right there present with us regardless of what we are going through. See, when we do all the right things, what happens when all we get is disappointment and silence? It's spiritually crushing. I forgot I had this slide. Yes, it's spiritually crushing. When you do all the right things, you ever end up there? You do all the right things, you expect an outcome, and you feel as if God totally is looking the other way and you've been abandoned and neglected. And then what happens is it really crushes your soul, because if you do all the right things and you don't get that outcome, doesn't seem like God is listening, well, it must surely be you, because then you're not trying hard enough. And well-intentioned Christians will often give you that message where you're just not praying enough. You just got to pray another hour. You just got to go to church a little bit more. You got to read your Bible a little bit more. I mean, when you do all the right things and you don't get that outcome, it can destroy your soul. And I would think that this is a reason why many people have walked away from the Christian faith, because they were told to do this, this, and this, and then it didn't end up the way in which they were told it was going to end up, and so more burdens get placed on them, and they just can't keep up with that pressure. Here is a story from the Odyssey. Odysseus is saying, my sacrifices, I'm doing everything possible because I want to return home in my power. And so I'm sacrificing everything so that the gods will hear, the gods will answer, and the gods will do that which I desire. But my sacrifices have failed to move Zeus. Zeus was still obsessed with plans to destroy my entire oar-swept fleet and loyal crew of comrades. Often feels like this in life. We're doing all the right things, yet God is radio silent. What this parable tells us is that God pursues you out of joy. God pursues you out of love. In the midst of your sin, in the midst of your shame, in your moments when you are lacking faith, in the moments when you feel unworthy or inadequate, the truth of this parable says God is still pursuing you because God desires you and God values you. God is ever faithful to you, and Jesus shows us that God will sell it all. Remember, these parables are about values and desires. What is God's greatest desire? To restore you, to bring you home. And God will go to whatever depths, whatever lengths are necessary to bring restoration and wholeness to your life. So may you remember, you are the treasure, and you are the priceless pearl.